All right. I think we're live. Are we live? Okay, we're live. Sorry about that. Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to the session. Thanks for coming in, and welcome. Thank you for joining me in this session. And I hope everyone is safe and healthy wherever you are in the world today. And I just want to start by saying, as with every Sunday, I am super honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things I want to do today in our time together in sacred space is, number one, to set sacred space, and then we will talk about our overall topic. We're on this tear of fairy tales and talking about fairy tales, and then letting the fairy tales kind of bring us through brainstorm into whatever theme it is we're talking about for that week. And this week, I think the theme will be the healing progression from intellect to embodiment. The healing progression from intellect to embodiment, which is kind of exciting. We'll have a little bit of an exercise after that, and then we'll close sacred space. Okay, so now I will go ahead and start the process of setting sacred space. And to start, I'd just say that our intention here is to create, for an hour or two, a space, a shared space, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, for us to open to the higher guidance from within ourselves, however we choose to define that. Could be from intuition, from our muses, from higher guidance, hairs on the back of our neck, brilliant flashes of insight. But basically to create here together a safe sanctuary space where we can all relax and surrender with the assurance of no danger or threat, so that we can relax and partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together in group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. The first is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, that applies for in-person gatherings, but here when we're talking about online, obviously, the video feed is public, open to everyone. So the way we would do confidentiality here is through anonymization. So you don't have to be anonymous. You can be if you want. But if you wish, you would come into the crowdcast version of the stream, where you would register. You would go into your edit profile and just change your username to Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or Harry Potter, and then continue to chat or ask questions from there. But again, you don't have to, participate. You don't have to chat or ask questions at all. You'll just stay anonymous if you just kind of watch passively. The second principle: no threat or controlling, no fixing, no intervention with good intentions, no tough love. In other words, we are here to hold space for each other, not to cure each other or to fix each other, but to hold space for each other to be however we actually are, however we actually find ourselves to be in the moment. This in Northern California here, it's Sunday morning. To be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy and relaxed, to be afraid and anxious and to feel bad or weak or incompetent about being afraid or anxious, or to be happy and relaxed, and to feel guilty about feeling happy and relaxed, in this time of uncertainty and tumult. And however you are, right, the point is that during this space, we will be okay with that and hold space for that. The third principle: no commerce. So as a corollary to the last principle, nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything, Gary. We can't sell anything to each other, or recommend it, even if it's free. Let me suggest this book you should read, right, for this problem you're talking about. We don't do that. In the introductory video to each of these sessions, I explain more about why that is. But when we're in sacred space, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring, for what you are, not for what you do or provide. The fourth principle is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. So you don't have to chat. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to watch continuously. You can come and go as you please. It's totally okay. We're here for you. We're holding this space, and you just come and go as you please. Take a sip of the nourishment and leave. Gorge on the nourishment for the full hour or two, and clamor for more. That's okay too. And yeah, this is a space of comfort, of that is devoid of fear, threat, and control, and filled, we hope, of this feeling of love, nourishing, and surrender. And all of us together in a group will tend to amplify that effect. Okay, so that is what I propose, those four principles. And as we move into sacred space together, just to do a quick check, if you're not okay with entering into that kind of space, we will give you a moment to, now we'll just pause, to give you a moment to make your selection. And if you want, you can withdraw from the group. And that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to stay in the group, to come to the group, or what have you. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space and still hang out. No worries at all. So for now, I'll just give you a moment to dial that in and make your selection on whether you would like to continue. Okay. So for now, for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we come into sacred space, I will remind you of the four principles we observe: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Space. It's so great to be back here in this, I think, our 32nd session of Sacred Space during the pandemic, but I think it's going to sort of go on indefinitely at this point. And our topic for this week is the topic of the healing progression from intellect to embodiment. So in this session, in our weekly fairy tale brainstorm, Gallery brought forward a fairy tale from the Yiddish tradition and read it to me. And this was a particularly hard one for me. I didn't resonate with it. I was like, I don't know what's going on. It doesn't make sense. And basically, when you go from like Hindu to Japanese to Northern European to Slavic to East African to Native American, right? When you jump around, the underlying physics are not identical, but very similar. But the languages, the dialect, the vocabulary of the mythopoetics is different. So it took me a good couple of days to readjust to this tradition. But Gary, of course, persevered. I was like, can you bring up a couple of others? And she's like, okay. And she grabbed them. And then about half an hour before the call, the sort of follow-up call, where we were going to look at other fairy tales instead, she said, just a minute ago, I got a bunch of downloads on this story, and let me share them. So she shared them. She moved the ball down the field, and we were kind of off to the races. So here we are. And the idea here is this brainstorm exploration we had of the dynamics of like the idea of the encroachment of the intellect and the profane into the realm of the sacred, which happens all the time, right? And then what a path to rebalancing that and recovering from that, right? Back to wholeness might look like. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll call Gary up on screen here. I'll let her sort of introduce and tell the story, and then kind of just let the golden thread lead us from there. Okay. All right, Gary, are you there? Do you want to come on screen? Hello. Oh, you're muted. I think you're muted.
Okay, I am.
Hello.
Hi, Artie.
Happy
Hi,
Sunday.
everyone. Yeah, happy Sunday to you too.
Yay. All
So,
right, this is my favorite part when you're reading the story.
yeah, that's the fun part.
um, okay, do
Yeah.
you want to tell us about the story?
Yeah, so I was reading a bunch of, Yiddish folk tales,
Hmm.
and this one really kind of caught my attention right at the beginning. But like you said, even to me, it was like I couldn't make sense of the story. It didn't mean anything. And also because there were so many elements of sort of dramatic plot movements in the story.
Hmm.
It wasn't like singled around one thing, like in the previous some of the tribal folk tales that we discussed. It was just that
Right.
one thing's central movement in the story, and then you just weave around it. And it was like so many different things happening.
Yeah, this definitely wasn't a case of like, this is what happens when everything goes right.
Yeah, definitely no. It was like so many complex, twists and turns. So I didn't know what it was, but I don't know why I was fascinated, but I think something just fascinated me about it. So it was like, okay. And I thought you would just tell me, oh, you know what? Like you always do. Like, you know what this is
I was like,
about?
can we
I
skip
don't
this
know
one? I don't want this one.
what and I can remember how we were just stuck on it and thinking, does it make any sense to you? No.
No,
Does it make any
no.
sense to you? No. I'm like, okay, I think we should move on. And until the last minute, I didn't think this was a story we were going to do because I was like, okay, just nothing, no insight.
Hmm.
And it's
Or maybe
literally,
it still doesn't make sense. We'll tell the story and
let's
we'll
see.
see what we get back from everyone.
Yeah. Okay, then let me
Okay.
tell the story. We'll see
All
how
right.
that
Let me
goes. Yeah.
get off screen here. Okay.
So this story is called Hang the Moon on My Palace Roof. So just as bizarre as the rest of the story. And you would imagine because it mentions palace roof, it's got something to do with royalty. But the story actually begins with an old fisherman. So once upon a time, there was an old fisherman who lived with his wife in a little hut beside the sea. And he went fishing one day and caught a duck that swam by, and he took the duck home to his wife. And a little while later, this duck laid a brass egg. So, what do you do with something like that? So he took the egg to the local squire. And when he showed it to the squire, the squire was impressed. So he gave him a kopeck for that, which was much more than he could have earned by an ordinary egg, right? And the fisherman was quite pleased with this. And sometime later, the duck laid another kind of, fascinating egg. And this time it was silver. And the man again took this egg to the squire. And this time the squire paid him 2 kopecks because obviously silver is more valuable than brass. And the fisherman went back. And the third time, the duck laid a golden egg. So this is even more valuable. And he took it back to the squire. And this time the squire said, I would like to buy the duck itself, and I'll pay you a rendle for it. Now, rendle was a gold coin. And the story says that apparently the gold coin was more than what a fisherman would have earned in his entire lifetime. And yet he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to sell the duck. So he told the squire that I want to talk to my wife about it, and then I'll let you know. So he went back home and he told his wife that I've been offered a rendle for the duck, and I'm not sure I want to sell it. And the wife said, well, you'd better sell him for a rendle, sell the duck for a rendle, because, this is the squire we're talking about. If you refuse to sell it to him, he might just take it away from us anyway. So you're better off taking the money. And so the man took the duck to the squire, sold it, took the rendle, and that was that. Now, the squire, when he bought the duck, he was kind of, looking the duck over because he wanted to know what is this mysterious thing that it gives these fascinating eggs. And he noticed some blue markings under the wing, and he couldn't make sense of them. So he sent for the priest, and the priest looked at those markings, and he said, it was actually a script, so he read it out, and he said, "He who eats the liver of this duck will become king, and he who eats the right wing will become the viceroy." Now, so that's a simple thing to do. It's almost like the duck said, "Eat me," right? So the squire asked the duck to be killed, and the liver in the right wing had to be put into a pot to cook. And then he was waiting for this precious meal. And at this time, the squire's two sons, both of them came from outside. They were terribly hungry, ran into the kitchen, and they saw something was cooking, and they lifted the lids. And the older son just snatched up the liver and he ate it, while the younger son ate the wing, because that's the pot he uncovered. And they were so hungry, they weren't even paying attention to what they were eating. And the cook came in at that time to dish up the meal, and he saw that this was all eaten up already, and he said, "What did you do? This was a special meal." So he ran to the squire and fell on his knees and said, "Your sons ate up the dish that I was making for you. Please forgive me. I don't know what to do." And the squire was furious. He sent for the priest, and he told him that this is what happened. Now, please advise me what I should do. And the priest said, "Well, order your sons to be killed and eat their livers, because your sons ate up the magical thing that was supposed to make you king. So now you'll have to eat their livers, and that way you'll get to be king." So the squire sent for the cook and said, "Okay, I want you to kill my sons and roast their livers and dish it up for me." And listening to this, the cook was horrified, and he fell on his knees and begged and said, "Please have pity on your children. I can't do this." And the squire then, he wouldn't listen to that. And he said he ordered this to happen, and he even whipped the cook until he agreed to it. So at night, when both the boys were sleeping, the cook went into their room, and he had a knife and a sharpening stone. So he started to sharpen his knife. And even as he was doing that, tears started rolling down. And the sound of him crying and the sound of the knife being sharpened woke up the boys. And they asked the cook, "What are you doing? Why are you crying? Why are you here?" And the cook told them, "The squire has ordered me to kill you and cook your livers." And then the older boy said, "Well, can't you have pity on us? Why don't you let us go and maybe kill our dogs? Take the dog's liver to our father and, just let us go." And so the cook did that. He killed and buried the dogs, and he cooked the livers, and he fed the squire the livers of the dog. And the boys jumped out of the window and they ran away. They couldn't be in that home anymore, right? And they traveled on until they came to a large city. And they went street to street looking for work and looking for some way to make a living. And they passed by a tailor's window. And they went in and asked the tailor, "Can you help us earn our clothes and our food?" So the tailor said, "Okay, take some needles and thread, scissors and pressing irons. Help me to cut and sew and stitch and press clothes, and then I'll feed and clothe you." So the boys did that, and they became good apprentice tailors. And as this was going on, one day the king died, and the princess, the king's daughter, announced to the town, and she said, "I will marry the strongest and cleverest man in the country." So all the strongest men in the country were sent for. They all came to the town. There was a wrestling contest, and there was a very strong man who had come from beyond the darkest, mountains of darkness. And when this strong man came in and he defeated everyone, it almost seemed like he was going to win until the two tailor's apprentices came in. And everyone laughed at them because they didn't look like wrestlers. They didn't look strong. But the older apprentice actually managed to beat the champion. And then the younger apprentice wrestled with all the other contestants and he beat all of them. So the two brothers were like the final winners, at least finalists in the contest. So now the king's daughter had said she would marry the strongest and the cleverest man. So the contest then moved on from wrestling to when the princess ordered 50 candles to be brought and placed in a row. And she said whoever would blow out the candles, all 50 of them in one breath, would be the winner. So both the brothers tried this one after the other, and they both managed to blow them out in a single breath. Right, so they were still contesting. And then the princess said to the older apprentice, she said, take the moon out of the sky and hang it from the tip of my palace roof. And he replied, he said, first, braid me a rope of sand so that I can use it to hang the moon from the tip of the palace roof. So she then turned to the younger apprentice and said, go up to the sun and bring back one of its coals so that I can use it to heat up my oven. And the younger brother replied, harness the wind to your chariot so that I can drive up to the sun and then bring back one of its coals. So this time she turned around to the older apprentice and she said, sew me a dress without any seam. And he replied, okay, give me a length of silk made of smoke, and then I'll make you a dress without a seam. And again, this time she turned to the younger apprentice and said, sew me a coat without taking my measurements. And the younger boy said, give me an endless length of thread, and I'll make you a coat without taking measurements. So with all of this, the princess was still not sure which of the two she was to marry. So they cast lots for her, and the lot fell to the older brother. So he became the king, he married the princess, and his brother was made the viceroy. So that's how that prophecy, came to be fulfilled. Now, one day, the king, who's the older brother, said to the viceroy, let's go back to our old village, our old home, and see what's going on with our father. It's a good idea. So what they did was they wore shabby clothing over their royal garments, and then stuck all their needles and threads to their lapels, and then they took shears and scissors and pressing irons with them, all of their tailoring tools. And then they rode to the village of their father, the squire. And by the time they arrived, it was already evening, and they asked for a place to sleep. And they were told by the villagers, apparently, you can sleep in the kitchen behind the oven. So they said, okay, that's all right. And then the squire heard that there were travelers in town, so he sent for them. So the brothers were taken to the room where the priest and a group of noblemen were sitting with the squire. And the squire said, all right, tailor boys, I hear you traveling through my town. Now tell us an interesting story. So the brothers started telling the story of a magic duck and everything that happened from the time the duck gave eggs and, then it was killed, till the time when the older brother became king, the younger one became viceroy. So basically they narrated their entire story. And when they finished this tale, they threw off the shabby clothes that they were wearing to hide their royal garments, and they stood in front of him, revealed in their whole imperial attire. And instantly, when everyone knew who they were, they fell to their knees and bowed down. But at that moment, they beheaded the squire and the priest, who'd obviously given the advice of killing the boys. And the cook, who had saved their lives, was taken back to the city, and he was made prime minister. So from that day to this day, apparently they all lived contented, and they never had any want. So that's the story. Artie, are you there? Okay.
Yay! Good job. Good job. Thank you. Thank you.
Artie.
So yeah. So after hearing that, my first reaction was, huh?
Like, what's going on with this one?
What's going on? There's too much going on. What's going on? Yeah. So before I dive in, like, let me ask, where did you enter into that story? Where do you enter into that story?
It's kind of like a very classic fairy tale that, you know, we've heard growing up. Like all of the magic and, you know, the story of bravery and contests to win the princess, all of those really classic elements that were there. But what puzzled me in the story and what seemed very unfamiliar was the boys, when they were in exile, literally away from home, they become apprentices to a tailor, and they learn tailoring. And that really intrigued me, because I was like, why tailoring? I mean, it's supposed to say something. What is it saying? Why tailors? Why that particular craft? Why not a goldsmith, let's say? Why not a blacksmith? Right. I don't know, right? Why tailor? So that's kind of, that just played on my mind for a while. And I think it eventually led me to kind of think of clothes, you know, in a symbolic way, are somewhat similar to the body itself. I think so. That's where we made the connection, I think, and then that's when we went in. So yeah, so the tailoring thing really nagged me for quite some time. So that's where I went into the story.
I love that. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Should I share some of my notes on this?
Yeah. So I think because at this point when we were discussing that, you did say that, oh yeah, this is about, you know, embodiment, going from what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So that's how we then built up into that. So yeah, please do share.
Yeah, this whole run of, I almost said dreams, fairy tales and folk tales that we've been on. I think this is like the 5th, maybe 6th fairy tale that we've told in Live Sacred Space. It's really interesting to like sort of draw the line of the golden thread from one story to the next That might make an interesting session at some point, like later. I don't think we're done with this run yet, but for those of you who are like new to this session, have not been following the last several weeks, all the replays are available, by the way. The way we read fairy tales is to basically read them as dreams, which basically means that we regard every major actor in the story as a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. Right? So the squire is you, the boys are you, the duck is certainly you, the queen is you, the sort of art of tailoring, right, is you as well. And they're all different. Those of you who do healing with you, they're all different board members, and you can interview them separately to get insight. That's one of the ways we get sort of information in the healing process and in the bliss process. And so I think because of Gary's perseverance, she gave me time certainly to like slot back into the mythopoetic, I guess, dialect of this fairy tale tradition. And the first thing I'll just say here is that, you know, in the Slavic tradition, Yiddish, Slavic, Eastern European, Russian tradition, clothing, right, not limited to these traditions, I mean, but especially in that tradition, clothing is often a symbol of embodiment, right? So you have these classic stories like the firebird, or even I forgot the name of the other one, but basically there's like, Princess Vasilisa, who is like this fairy queen, sort of divine inner feminine, and Prince Ivan is like going through the sort of countryside, either looking for her or questing, not knowing that she's the ultimate sort of destination. And one of the trials is often that Ivan needs to go down to the bottom of the ocean, to the deepest level of insight. Ocean water is a symbol of insight, to retrieve her wedding dress from a chest that's under a boulder in the deepest part of the ocean. Right. And the idea is like Vasilisa is of the highest sky realm, and for full sort of integration with her, right, to bring her to Earth so that she can be human and be fruitful and multiply in terms of creativity, procreativity, generativity, fulfilling your bliss in life, basically.
Right.
You need to go to the lowest, right, the opposite of the highest, the lowest, in terms of depth of insight. So not just spirit, which is up, but soul, which is down.
Right.
And what comes from the depths is embodied, this wedding dress. And then she inhabits the wedding dress, and then she is sort of embodied. And there can be full flowering and engagement integration.
Right.
So that's the basic idea of clothing as a symbol of embodiment. The spirit needs to come down to the body for the full natural fulfillment and creativity to happen.
Right.
So here then, just kind of walking through this a little bit, we start with this fisherman, the old man, right? Gets this duck while fishing. And the question right off the bat is like, how do you catch a duck while you're fishing?
Yeah.
So to get caught in your net, does it actually take the worm off the hook? It's absurd, right? You don't typically catch a duck while fishing. Obviously, the duck just comes to you when you're floating in the water of inside of the ocean. The duck comes to you of its own accord, just like Vasilisa appears to you. From the sky realm, you have this gift, this divine inspiration, the gift of your talent, the gift of your bliss, the gift of the things you naturally love to do.
Yeah.
And the duck in particular is a powerful symbol because classically, a bird is a symbol of the spirit world and intellect.
Right.
And, water is the realm of deep emotion, right? So spirit and soul, sky and water. And then the interim realm, so earth realm, the third realm of the three realms is the earth, which is the normal place, just where we are, where humans are. And it's when spirit and soul meet that you have embodiment, that you have all the action that can manifest on this plane, if you will. And a duck is a powerful symbol because it is one of the few beings who can easily traverse all three realms. Right? The duck can fly, the duck can walk on land, and the duck can be on water and then dive into water for nourishment.
Yeah.
Okay. And just as a side note, it's particularly why certain large waterfowl, especially light-colored, white-colored waterfowl, cranes in Japan, swans, are sacred. Right? Even now, do we eat swan? Right? We don't eat swan. It's not just like, oh, we don't eat swan because it doesn't taste good. It's like just the idea of cooking and eating a swan is absolutely repugnant. Right? Even in the modern profane world, where we eat everything, nothing is sacred, we strip mine forest, everything. If you ask, regular person on the street, I'd like to take you to my home and cook you swan for dinner, they would probably recoil from you and never speak to you again. Right? Why is that? Right? There's no culture that eats swan or cranes. So it is this idea of this wisdom and insight coming in later life, the old man phase. And it comes by grace. And of course, then it yields progressively profound and powerful new beginnings in the form of these eggs. The bronze egg, then the silver egg, then the gold egg. So the longer you keep this duck swan with you,
right,
the more the sort of new beginnings progress. Right? And this is something in the sage crone phase, this latter phase of life.
Yeah.
So that's the old man and the duck. Now we have the squire, and the squire is typically a symbol of like profane power, power in the profane world, power in kind of the world of career track, money, prestige, honor. In the Arthurian cycle, it's the knights who quest for the Grail that are the kind of pure and innocent, like Gawain, Galahad, Parsifal, certainly, right? Parsifal. And in these stories, King Arthur, right, the king of the Round Table, is often seen as the symbol of the, not exactly the profane world, but the world of your career, right? Knightly prestige, honor. You follow a chivalrous code; it's very rigid. You do the right thing, you get to the next thing. And the purpose of these knights going out into the dark forest, those sort of unexplored realms of the self, where you go out of the village, you know, and you find things in the dark forest that are terrifying, that, you know, behead you, bring you shame, bring you all these things. But the healing sort of nectar is always to be found in the forest. It's never in the realm of the of Arthur. So Squire is definitely sort of that realm.
Yeah.
So when you bring insights, these duck eggs, into the profane world, the profane trades with you and reward you, give you validation, right? You can pay the bills with these kopecks, but eventually the profane always encroaches and says, give me the source of this. Give me, where are these eggs coming from? Give me, I want the duck too. I don't just want the eggs. I want the duck too. Okay. So for instance, you have a great meditation experience, right? You go to meditation class, you do one of my meditation things, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was unbelievable. That was incredible. Instead of just leaving it alone and saying, that's great, well, wherever that came from, more will come.
Right.
The profane in you, the squire in you says, no, we want more. We want more. How do we capture this? We have to set a schedule and make it a part of our routine forever, right? Now, I'm not saying that's bad, because the profane isn't bad, right? But there is a point where it's like, you know, you can buy the egg and pay for it and nurture sort of the source of the egg. But there's a point at which you cross the line and you say, I want the duck itself. And the duck kind of rolls its eyes and says, you know, why do you have to control everything, right? Do you not believe in grace? Do you not believe in, like, you know, where do you think I even came from? Or you didn't capture me, I came to you.
Right.
In modern vernacular, dude, why can't you just chill? Why can't you just chill? So there's this feeling of, and I do this, everyone does this, it's human nature. So once the squire takes the duck, there is a sense of all right, now we're in for it, right? Now here's where like the shit show is probably really going to start, right?
Yeah.
Now you're moving upstream, and even the wife makes a cameo appearance, right? The feminine is very sort of like in the back, like sort of backstage here.
Mm-hmm.
The old man follows his instinct, and he's like, you know, I don't want that. I don't care if I'm gonna get in one day more money than I could make in my entire life. I've already lived my life. I'm an old man, right? And I want to keep the duck. And she says, right, you better just give it to him, because if you don't take the money, he's going to come and take it anyway. Fear, threat, and control.
Right.
But the squire doesn't actually threaten him. I mean, it's very much a credible threat. Right. But just the threat alone, right, is enough for you to give up the ghost of this divine sort of gift that you've been given.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of ways we could sort of, spell this out in real life. It's like, well, I'm a poet, I'm a sculptor, but I need to put all that away in order to like become an investment banker and make, more money than I can ever make in a lifetime as a poet, right?
Right.
And I better do it anyway, because if I don't, I'm going to starve as a poet and need to like scratch a living anyway. Why don't I just like let it go and like go down in flames, right? So the first thing that's out of order here is this encroachment, right? And then the second thing, because the profane has already shown its hand. And so the second thing then is the killing of the duck.
Right.
Right? I suspect, my feeling here is that it's properly the killing of the swan or the crane. But if you were actually a traveling troubadour or bard and you entered a pub and you talked about killing the swan, they probably would have like thrown you out and like beaten the crap out of you. So they probably softened it to a duck, right? But it's almost like, it's like in stories where there's like a gash on the thigh, it actually implies castration, right? But we don't say castration, we just say gash on the thigh. And everyone knows what that means without like really triggering, right?
Right.
So he kills the duck for profane power in order to be the king. Literally, the squire kills the duck in order to get promoted to being King Arthur.
Right.
Right. And we do that all the time. Artists do this, rock stars do this, great writers do this, right? They get the Nobel Prize and, you know, I mean, they probably like kept the duck going for a while in order to sort of get to that level, and they continue.
Right.
But often like fame, sort of money, celebrity hits, and the duck is like out the window. Okay. The magical inspiration that flows through you gets you some gold from the squire, and then you get sucked in from the profane side, because the profane seems more concrete, more controllable. But it's not, right? All your grace is coming from the duck, and you're really killing it. So now we move on to the suns, right? The suns are a symbol of the emerging masculine. So if there's a word dream, it would be like, so there, I have an inner masculine and an inner feminine. We've talked at length about this in previous sessions. And the old man, the squire, and the sons, and the priest and the cook, by the way, are all different aspects of the single inner masculine. Right. So when the squire like gets the duck from the old man, it's one part of your inner masculine transforming that power and saying, no, we're going to use that God-given talent for whatever, for this purpose. Come on, let's just go. Let's move, right? And it's the inner masculine sort of doing that. And so when you see children and babies in dreams, sons, daughters, kittens, puppies, right? They're typically a symbol of the next version of whatever it is they symbolize. Right. So now you have the inner masculine from old man to squire doing his profane squire things. And then the next generation, inner masculine 2.0 or 3.0, are these sons. And if there is going to be sort of rebalanced redemption, it's going to come from the next version. Right. It's the new growth that like that makes up for the transgressions of the current generation. So they come in, and the first touch on the ball, the minute they get on the soccer field, is this desire for nourishment, spiritual, emotional nourishment, right, which is what food symbolizes in a dream. They come in hungry. They don't even know what they're eating. They just eat it. They eat the duck, which is the natural order, right? The next generation gets the nourishment. The father should be, like our first reaction when we're reading the story, it's like, oh, the father should be thrilled that his eldest son is going to be the king. Right, and he'll just be the regent or like the retired sort of happy father of the king. Right. It's natural when you have nourishment, when you have insight, when you have profane power, to pass it on to the next generation. It's joyous, it's bountiful. We already know something's off with the squire. He's too profane. He's crossed the line, and he's demonstrated that there's basically something wrong with this cog in the machine. Right. So he's furious. And he orders the children, the kids killed, the boys killed. Right. So here he is, this out of control, cancerous sort of squire, inner masculine, driven by the profane, so it's the profane side of you, which is what the squire intrinsically represents, is grabbing insight from the previous generation and grabbing power and opportunity from the next generation, right? It's like I'm stealing from my parents and I'm stealing from my children as well. That's cancer, right? It's this organ that's like not functioning properly, right? Ideally, like you take nourishment from the previous generation, you grow to full strength, then you take care of the previous generation and you take care of the next generation. That's how it continues. Like acorns do this, grizzly bears do this. Everybody does this.
Right.
And when it doesn't work in human society, in outer society, or even within you, it's because there's a wound, like something's broken, right?
Mm.
I mean, if I'm not doing right by my children and I'm just being like a bastard or whatever, it's because something's broken. There's something wounded in me. Something is malfunctioning. That's not the way it's supposed to happen. Okay.
Right.
So he's doing this. This overdeveloped and out of control intellect and profane. Part of the symbolism here is the priest. Now, these fairy tales, especially these sort of Slavic fairy tales, Northern European fairy tales, were part of like heretical movements, right? Women, often women-led movements that resisted the power of the church, right, in Middle Ages. The target of inquisitions, witch burnings, sort of the genocide of like the Cathars, and like I think it was in southern France. I mean, this is not taught in like school, but this is all of this is documented. And so one of the few places this sort of wisdom and culture survived was in fairy tales, because they said, no, you don't need to burn these things. It's just harmless children's tales. Okay. But here you have a little bit of a vestige of this attitude, which is the priest is the bad guy, right? The priest is the one who's advising the squire, making the squire messed up. And what does the priest do? The priest follows the word and the intellect. You have this grace of God coming down to you, giving gifts. And the priest, instead of looking at the overall duck, reads for the scripture. Okay, and that's okay. That's okay. Reads for the scripture, and reads that whoever eats the liver becomes the king. Whoever eats the right wing becomes the, who sits at the right hand of God. There's all kind of, we can talk for hours on that, and I'll spare you. But the priest is the intellect, right? And the old saw against the Catholic Church by these sort of point of view is that the Catholic Church is all spirit and intellect and abstraction. Don't live for today. Shame your body, shame pleasure, no sex, no women, no food. The 7 deadly sins are all about like these visceral physical emotions. Disembody, and look intellectually for the future of another life in heaven, right? Where you are literally disembodied. Okay. Mary is a virgin. She is the mother of God, but she's not a God, an actual, God. She's just somehow this like dumb cow of a vehicle, right? For the Son of God. And which is hugely disrespectful of the goddess. And everything's up in this sort of abstract realm, and anything with regard to the body, enjoyment, celebration, all of that is pushed down. And so there's a telling thing here, which is the priest is able to read this word of God in the duck. Okay. But then, as is always the case with intellectualization, you take it one step further, right? You like play these logic games and you take it one step further, where it wasn't the original message of the duck. And the message is, he reads that, and then it's like, well, if the boys ate the liver, then it stands to reason, it's perfectly logical, right? That's these classic phrases, that you can just eat the boys. You just eat the boys. It doesn't say that on the duck.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that on the duck.
It doesn't say this coupon can be redeemed only once.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. But the priest, I mean, that's professional clergy for you, right? The world over, in every tradition.
Right.
Says, just like in the Hansel and Gretel, well, if before you said A, then you say B. If this, follows, then that follows.
Yeah.
And the trick here is that the intellectualization takes you in a direction, and that it's wrong because the body recoils at it. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Cook my sons? Are you nuts? Are you insane?
Right.
Right? It's like, you could say, well, it's just logical. But if you're embodied, you're like, yeah, it may be logical, but it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. Get out of my sight. But no, the squire, advised by the profane, advised by the priest, ironically, which is the profane intellect. There's a very subtle message here, writing these in these sort of traditions. Says, okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. It just follows all the way through. I mean, just like in, I mean, you can get into all kinds of examples from politics and current events in many different countries, right? Especially in Europe, where it's like, well, we've been following this policy all along. What's one more step logically forward? And the next thing you know, like, all these children are being separated from their parents at the American border, right? And it's like outrageous, but it's like everyone's just blindly following logic, completely disembodied. Anyway, so not to sort of harp on that stuff. But here, the priest says this, and the squire goes along with it. Counterbalancing the priest is the cook. Right? What is the cook? The priest is the one who goes highfalutin in the abstract spiritual realms. The cook is the one who feeds the body, the nourisher of the body, with matter, with material. And literally, this is just like the squire whipping the cook, saying, do this unnatural thing. And the cook says, no, no, no. And he whips him. It's like, okay, fine. That's just like your body. You're doing a job you hate in an industry you have no business being in, but you're good at it and you make a lot of money. Right? And you've been doing it for 15 years. So how can I stop now? Okay. Monday morning, like 6 a.m., the alarm goes off. You can't get out of bed. Your body's like, hell no. Not another week of this. You're in the shower, you're dry heaving. You can't do it. And you whip your body to get in the car and go to work anyway. That's this feeling of the squire whipping the cook. So the cook then goes into the sons. Now the sons are the squire version 2.0.
Yeah.
And they don't run, they don't beat up the cook. It's the two of them. They could take it.
Yeah.
They say, well, can't you just kill the dogs? And the cook's like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, let's do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hardly a good solution, but there's this idea here that, I mean, there's all these nooks and crannies we can go into that I won't because of time. But dogs, right, are masculine in dreams. And when you see animals in dreams, they're a symbol of the body, right? So neck down, your physicality, sensuality, sexuality, instinct, intuition.
Right.
So here, this turn of events is pushed to the point where the dog, literally the embodied inner masculine, is killed / transformed.
Right.
And what's interesting is that in the squire's house, embodiment is in the dogs, which means they're separate from you, separate from the squire, and inferior.
Right.
And this manifestation where it's separate and inferior is killed. It's transformed. And it will come back later in the story.
Yeah.
So they do that. And then they, and what's interesting is that when the cook feeds the dog livers to the squire can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
The squire can't tell the difference. Right? He literally cannot tell the difference between the dog meat and his sons. I mean, both are horrific, but that's how numbed he is to the realm of, the body and the realm of nature. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's all these signals around embodiment, right? To begin with, intellect versus instinct, reason versus feeling, spirit versus soul.
Right.
So the boys escape. They get the hell out. And then in order to complete the transformation and healing and reintegration, they train in, I kid you not, tailoring. Right. Which is literally the craft of embodiment. It is this craft of embodiment that nourishes them, that feeds them, that literally keeps your inner masculine alive and grows them to strength.
Right.
They don't just run off and become king because that's the prophecy. They have to grow. What nourishes them? What protects them? What feeds them? It is the practice of embodiment. In real life, you could translate into anything. It could be anything. Working out in an embodied way, not in just an intellectual, like how do I get ripped and take steroids or whatever, right? Working out, yoga, being in touch with your emotions, et cetera, et cetera. Any of these practices.
Right.
And through that, they continue to get their nourishment. That's how they literally feed themselves and nourish themselves. It's the same nourishment of the liver and the wing, right? This nourishment of the body.
Yeah.
And so what's powerful here when they go from the tailors to the queen's palace, the two times they transfer, like when they go from the tailors to the queen's palace, and then when they go from their own palace, now that they're like, a queen and king and viceroy, and they go back to the father's place, the squire's place, it always is very careful to describe in the story, they take their tailoring tools with them, the shears, the needle and thread, and everything. In other words, they bring, right, their skills and powers of embodiment with them through each transformation. It's a critical point. It's a critical point.
Right.
Because this is their calling card, right? They're artisans skilled in the art of embodiment, and this is the thing that carries you through all the transformations of life.
Right. I was quite intrigued about that, because I was always thought, why does the story actually make that specific point that they take the tailoring kit to the palace when they marry the princess, and they take the tailoring kit to the father's place when they go there? It really insists on that point so that we take notice of it. So
it's very punctuated. It's like a neon sign.
Yeah.
And so it's
the healing and the transformation that they go through, the journey that they go through of embodiment and reintegrating with themselves is something that they carry through their entire life. So it's not just one phase of their life. It accompanies them everywhere.
Absolutely.
So it's not like you do this and you're done, and you don't look back.
And what's interesting is these boys, these symbols of the emerging inner masculine, they've already ingested the liver and the wing.
Right.
They're going to be king and viceroy, right?
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen like that. Because, frankly, as we said in the previous session, right, there's a tempo of the body that is its own tempo.
Right.
Intellectually, you're like, well, I'm done. So why aren't I king right now? Why don't you just, blink an eye, snap a finger, and we're done? And it's like, no, it's like, just because we say these grapes will become wine doesn't make it instant, right? There's a natural rhythmic through the seasons, embodied, nature-driven. It's reality. We keep saying nature versus intellect. There is only nature.
Yeah.
Right? Intellect arises out of nature. Consciousness arises from like my brain, which is my body, right?
Yeah.
There's only second bird, right? Only the second bird is the only thing that actually exists. First bird is just a wave on the ocean of second bird. Okay, so when we get to the queen's palace, there's three categories of tests. First is raw physical strength, beating up the other bodies, they pass. The second, blowing out the 50 candles, for me is symbolic of like the strength of the breath. So the breath is the spirit, right? And this is a highfalutin spirit that the church relies on, that intellect relies on, that the profane relies on. But this is the power of the voice and the breath coming from the body.
Right.
Right. It's not just written and dead and like they're in a sacred text. Right. It's spoken. And the measure is not how eloquent you are. The measure is how powerful is your breath, which is a measure of the power of your body. So blowing candles out with one breath, 50 of them. Power of the voice to extinguish fire, right? Agni, the power of spirit, to balance and calm the Agni, the fire of desire, of anger, etc., etc. This is done through the body. Blowing candles out with one breath is done through the body, not through the intellect. And both boys can do it. They've both been trained equally. And then the third category of test is the test of wits, test of intellect. And so she asks for impossible things, and they answer. So she asks for impossible things, which are not things she actually wants, because she doesn't say no marriage until you bring me the moon, right? She's just masquerading in this over-intellectual sort of mode.
Right.
To test them. So she asks for impossible things, which is what the intellect does all the time. Right? Why don't you get this project done by like, next Tuesday? And it's like unreasonable. It's impossible. Right? You don't sleep, you do a shitty job, you cut corners, and then you kind of intellectually have checked the box that the project's being done, but it's not what you wanted to do. It's not what anybody wanted. Right? But intellect has like forced it forward. And so so she asks for impossible things. They reply with equally impossible answers to sort of match wits. And when they match her, she moves on to the next thing, which means she didn't really want the thing. She's just testing them. And many of the things they talk about are around threads and sewing and making clothes.
Right. Yeah.
So the feminine here, just like Princess Vasilisa, is literally asking for embodiment. So you're strong enough in body and breath, so body and spirit, you're strong enough.
Right.
And so now what I want from this strength is I want embodiment. Right. And I'm asking you through these impossible ways and seeing if you, so I'm asking from the abstract of the moon, I want it hanging on my palace. And they say, that's fine, just braid me a rope of sand, which is impossible. So she moves on. From the sun, I want something to heat up the home. So from the abstract of the sun, I want something that will actually warm my body and cook my food and feed me. And then the clothes, right? I want something with no seams. I want something with, and they're like, yeah, just give me a thread made of smoke, give me a thread that's endless. All these back and forth, wit matchings are about, to me, embodiment. And so they win, right? They win. The queen is asking to be embodied. And what's interesting here is that because they've proven their intellect, they've proven their ability, the job of inner masculine is manifestation, making clothes, embodiment, and boundary protection. So they've proven that they could protect boundaries of the encroachment of the intellect, which is what she's testing them on, right?
Right.
It's like she's kicking the tires, testing the water fastness of this sea craft to see if she can get them into intellectual jumbles and get them sort of all bunched up, right? And they with one stroke sort of block things. Even after that happens, the final decider between the two of them is that they cast lots, which means they leave it up to divinity and chance, which is appropriate because, the liver has already sort of decided, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, they don't choose by intellectualizing who is better, but by simply just going with how the intuition of the larger universe goes, just say, okay, we'll let somebody decide. It's not going to be me thinking and overthinking about this. Right.
Yeah. And if they had done that, the story from here forward, it would be repetitive, it would be redundant. Because if they had done that, it would be rewinding the story back to when the priest said, oh, just eat the sons. Since it said you can eat the duck, you can just eat the sons. Right? Because we already did that. We did that. So there's no need to sort of redo that. We're just going to move the story forward. I mean, the story's long enough as it is. The story's long enough as it is.
So there's one question that I also wanted to ask at this point before you move to the next part of the story is that princess here asking for all these impossible things, which is, you say she's asking for embodiment. So in the interpreted way of looking at it, would you say that the princess is perhaps the duck, which was, the insight which came in first when the duck was killed? There was a transformation that was to happen, right? So would the princess, would you say, is a reborn version of the insight of divine insight, kind of inspiration, and the muse, particularly, or the feminine vision, who kind of, is looking to basically be manifested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, because I mean it. So my wild ass intuition is the duck and the queen are connected.
Right.
Duck and the queen are connected. Yeah. And the power they inherit is from the feminine.
Right.
Right. So they don't, as kings, establish their kingdom. Right. They are accepted by the queen to be the sort of masculine leader of her kingdom. It's her kingdom.
Right. Right.
Right. I mean, it's like saying it's the muse's world. We just kind of manifest in it.
Yeah.
Which is why just sort of this feeling of patriarchy is so, and over intellectualized, disembodied patriarchy is so, it's so violating, right? It's so repugnant.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going. So they, so everything's great. They're king and queen, and viceroy. And then all of this then is punctuated by the final transformation, where they go back to the squire. Okay. Tell their story. And then they behead him. They behead him and they behead the priest. Now, this is always gory. It's like Grimm's fairy tales, the original versions. I was like, oh my gosh, they like kill the stepmother in this really gory way. These are all symbolic stories, right? And the action and the message has to be delivered symbolically, because these are very, very old tales, right? These are like, basically the idea is that when a dream comes to you, you're like, why does it speak to me in symbolic language? Why can't it just send me an email or a text and just tell me what the hell I need to do, right? And the answer is these dream images, which are what these fairy tales are. These fairy tales are, tens of thousands of years old, originally from the oral tradition, and they are basically collective dreams. Right? They are dreams that we all share, because when I read this dream and I interpret it for you, everyone's like, oh my gosh, yeah, intellect to embodiment, that makes sense. Right? If you're watching, I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about your personal, what's happening with your spouse or how you grew up or what abuse or wounds or trauma you like. I don't need to know any of that. Right? I can read this to you and it will apply to you. Just like if you're a bird from any part of the globe, if I talk about nests, you may have a different kind of nest. You may use your body as a nest. You may use different materials as a nest. But if I talk about the physics of the nest, you'll be like, oh yeah, that totally resonates. That's why. Right. I don't need to know what kind of bird you are to be able to say something interesting to you about the physics of a nest.
Right.
And similarly, I don't need to know your specifics of your history as a human to say something interesting about, the symbolism of embodiment in any of these fairy tales. So these stories come from your body. Archetypes emerge from your body. Okay. And because of that, they come in symbolic language, not in literal intellectualized language, because alphabetic language is linear. You like look at a page of text and you read linearly, line by line.
Right.
Whereas symbolic language is holistic. You look at the entire symbol all at once, and it like hits you on like a million different channels all at once. You feel it in your body. Right. And these stories, right, have been a part of human history even before the invention of writing and literacy. So it comes from a part of you that is pre-literate, right? Neanderthal man and woman, caveman, Cro-Magnon man and woman, like dreamed, right? And they sort of told stories. Okay, so then the sons go back to the squire and they behead him. And the head is a symbol of intellect.
Right.
The head is a symbol of intellect. So they remove the cancerous intellect from both squire and priest, and only the bodies are left. And then, you know, the sort of, and these are not people they're beheading. This is symbolically happening within your own self.
Right. Right.
I could say, well, you know, sort of do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and sort of rescript you and sort of, you know, stop intellectualizing so much and be more in your body and yoga and everything. That's how sort of a therapist would sort of say it today in today's sort of, you know, psychological vocabulary. Right. But what would Cro-Magnon man and woman say, right? It's just, you just behead it.
Right.
You just behead it. It's symbolic language.
Off with the head.
Off with the head. Off with the head.
It's a different kind of sense now. Yeah.
And it's only when that happens that you can have the final happily ever after. And again, it's telling that when they go back to do that last healing act, they don't go in their prestigious kingly garb. They have to get back into their craftsman garb as the artisans of embodiment.
Right.
In order to defend and sort of do the final healing through embodiment of the beheading, they have to go back into tailor mode, because they are they have to bring up their superpowers of embodiment. Right. And so this is the final transformation of the squire. So I mean, if you look at the overall arc, right, in the beginning, the power of the duck, this divine sort of given power, is taken away from the old man. And at this point, everything with the squire is out of sequence, right? The sort of boys are sort of, he tries to kill the boys. The priest, he listens to the priest, not the cook, right? Which is a huge mistake. And in the end, right, the inner masculine is the king and the viceroy, so the two sort of authorities. The priest is beheaded, and the cook, the servant and nourisher of the body, is the prime minister. That's a well-ordered administration, right? And at the end of the story, there's an increase in power, right? The inner masculine has gone up to kinghood. Body has gone up to prime ministerhood. And the inner feminine has returned. He has a queen next to him who is, it's her queendom, and she's the one sort of, you know, she is almost like the higher sort of, like the meta power here, right? And the masculine is all sorted out and ordered, beheaded, not too intellectual, fully embodied, and in fact, a sort of artist of embodiment itself, which is ideally what you want your inner masculine to be. It's ironic that, like, you know, if anything comes down from on high, it's the inner feminine. Right? She's the divine inspiration. The inner masculine, ironically, is the one that you want on the ground, because his two jobs are boundary protection, right? Boundary control and maintenance. And the second is manifestation, to like actually build the stuff on the realm of the earth, not in the sky realm, not in the water realm, but on the earth realm.
Right.
And so for those two key functions, I mean, the main thing you need are the powers of embodiment, right? And that's why it's like, it's not just like, oh, the patriarchy is bad because men are bad. It's not like that at all, right? The patriarchy is screwed up because it's disembodied, right? If you had patriarchy that was sort of masculine run and embodied, it wouldn't be a patriarchy anymore. It would be like, you know, an equal partnership between, because from an embodied sense, that's what feels right. Right. That's what feels right. And that it's the disembodiment that makes it all sort of toxic.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the notes I came up with. And so when we talked about this as like the healing, what do we even call this? The healing progression from intellect to embodiment. You start off with over intellect, And how do you get back to embodiment and balance, right?
Right.
The skill is that, well, first of all, you have to escape and not get sort of eaten by the squire.
Right.
Which for a lot of people, that's where they get stuck, right? They're eaten by the squire. They're like bankers and lawyers. No offense to bankers. Some of my best friends are bankers and lawyers. But they do that for 30 years. And then you have these older men and women who say, I never did the thing I wanted in my life. And it's like, oh, God, right? Eaten by the squire. So you need to escape that. And then the trick here is not to over literalize it. It's like you become a tailor.
Right.
You become a tailor. You stitch potentially with the thread, with the suture, with the sutra, right? Back into embodiment, back to the breath, back to your body, back to your feeling, your sensitivity, your sensuality, your physicality, your intuition, your instinct.
Right.
You go by how things feel. If they feel wrong, you don't do them.
Yeah.
And so becoming a tailor is what that symbolizes for me in these sort of more Slavic Russian fairy tale systems. But again, I can say that just because that's how it is translated when you read a Slavic fairy tale.
Right.
But again, it's like saying, oh, in the Slavic tradition, this is how we talk about nests. But the insight you get about how to sort of balance a nest and heal it is applicable regardless of your religion or tradition. It's like because you're a human too.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking of how the story talks about the boys spending time learning the trade of tailoring and becoming apprentices, becoming good apprentices, and then carrying the tailoring kit everywhere. And it then makes complete sense to me because, when you're disconnected from your body and you've spent most of your life taking life decisions based on logic, and looking for rationale in everything, looking for logical conviction in everything. And then you realize I need to get in touch with my body. It takes years to get back to that.
No.
It takes so long and such minute craft even to kind of learn how to be embodied, to learn to feel your limbs again, to learn to feel your guts again, literally, right? To listen to what your body is saying on a daily basis, like what do I feel like eating today, and how did this food react with my body today? You kind of every small thing. It takes years and years to get back to that sense of embodiment. So I felt like, and sensuality and sexuality, and it's the whole gamut of what the body constitutes, and everything. It takes years to get back in touch with that, and I feel like that's why the story kind of keeps emphasizing on it over and over, that this takes time and this is a whole journey, and this starts from here and then it cycles back and comes back here, and you don't complete it until you've finally done the off with the head routine consciously and willingly saying, okay, no more oversized head. That's not going to happen. And this is it was very telling for me and very powerful as well, because it kind of thought of all the times when every time, like how the squire says, okay, what do I do now? So logically, this is what do you do? And every time the brain asks you, okay, tell me the logical reason why I should make this choice and not that. And if I'm convinced by the logic, then we can do it. Otherwise, we can't. Right, and the body all the time is saying, no, it just doesn't feel right. I just don't feel right in my tummy. Just, I don't like it.
Why am I marrying this guy? I mean, he checks all the boxes. I mean, everyone else would give their left arm to marry a guy like this. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, but I guess logically I have to do it because,
Right.
I don't want to miss the train.
I went to the
sorry.
You had to go there, didn't you?
But the thing is, like, it's just this feeling of even though it is divinely ordained,
Right.
given by the duck, prophesized in blue on the duck's wing.
Right.
Blue, power of voice, literally the voice of the divine, that the one who eats the liver will be the king.
Yeah.
Even then, it takes a whole lifetime,
Yeah.
right, for the boy to get up there. And the reason why is it is divinely ordained, but it's not divine like in this disembodied word. The word comes on the body of the duck.
Right.
And then the realization of it comes from through the body of the duck.
Right.
Right? You can almost say like, the body and blood of Christ, right? So it's through the embodiment, not the disembodiment, that it happens. And even after you do the embodied thing and you follow the prophecy and it's like, hey, it's locked in, right? I'm going to be the king no matter what. You still have to go through this full circumambulation defined by nature because, not because like, oh, it's God's will and nature has like a countervote. It's precisely because nature is also, like the duck, divinely given.
Right.
Right? It's when you disembody yourself from the divinely given nature that, like devilish things and horrible things happen. It's like this one, like in the Cathar tradition, the Cathars were this like heretical movement that fought against the Catholic Church, that were Christians, right? They believed in God. They were very sort of devout, but they were more advocates of the body, and they were more advocates of nature. I mean, a quote from, like, we know some of the Cathar teachings precisely because of the records in the Church Vatican that exist to this day, of the interview transcripts of high inquisitors, interrogating witnesses to help root out the last of the Cathars in the village so you can find them and kill them. And these records still exist because like the bishop or whatever became pope, and there's a rule in the Catholic Church that if, once someone becomes pope, you need to basically take all of their correspondence ever, even when they were a field general in the Inquisition burning villagers. And those all need to be like preserved. So there are people who have done research and written and pulled out, because when they're mocking the Cathars, they're saying, oh, isn't it stupid that they believe this? And then they've re-pieced together what the Catholic belief system is. And basically, I remember this quote where it's like there's this farm girl, and the inquisitor was like, so did these two Cathars, did you see them? And she's like, well, I mean, yeah, we did. And what did they say? And she said, well, they came up over the hill and they said hello, and we started talking. And remember, there's no TV, there's no internet back, there's no books, right? So any new idea you get, it's like, can be stunning. And then the thing they said to her and her brother, who was like sitting next to her, says, are you not aware that all of the hills and trees here are the body of the Virgin Mary? And the inquisitor said, that's what they said? She said, yeah. And then what do you say? Well, we went back down to the farmhouse and we told everyone. And we were up for 3 days and 3 nights talking about it nonstop. And I don't think she was punished, but they were like, give us their names, and they went and they killed them. And so there were strains in Catholicism that were like honored because if you look at the hills and your belief system is that is the goddess, that is the Virgin Mary, you cannot cut a tree down, can you?
Right.
You cannot cut a tree down. If you divorce yourself, you say like God is sort of this separate thing and all of earth is just this like stupid, dumb stuff that you can do whatever you want with, animals included, then it's a completely different set of physics. So basically this idea of nature not being this separate thing that's fighting against divinity, but nature itself as it is with no human changes as a reflection of divinity. right? So if you go through the phases of life, through puberty, through boy, man, king, sage, right? Sort of girl, woman, queen slash mother, crone. That progression is divinely given, just like the duck. Right? Bronze egg, silver egg, gold egg. And it doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be like pathologized. I mean, nature and the rhythms of your body, the feeling of your body, fully count. Fully count.
So there's this interesting story I remembered when talking about the integration of the body with divine inspiration and the muse and the embodiment of what the muse gives you. I was listening to this fine art photographer called Rachel Talabart. She's an amazing, inspiring photographer. In almost all of her photography is beautiful seascapes. Right, so that's her main focus. And she's it's a typical story, right? So she was a solicitor who turned photographer in her 40s, and she'd been a solicitor for like 20 years, and she realized at one point, this is not what I want to do, and why am I even here? And one fine morning she decided, I mean, although it wasn't just a sudden one fine morning, but
what is a solicitor for our American audience?
Sorry?
What is a solicitor?
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Is a lawyer, advocate?
Lawyer. Okay, good.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize there was a different one for that. So she kind of turned into photography, and she actually mentions this, that her mentor who helped her get into fine art photography, because she was still figuring this out. She knew she liked photography, but she didn't know what she wanted to do. And he said, can you close your eyes and picture yourself being in a happy place, looking at your favorite thing, or photographing whatever you wanted to photograph? I mean, forget everything, just doing whatever you wanted to do. How happy you felt, in which place, where would you be, and what would you be doing? And she kind of closed her eyes and imagined herself by the beach, like sipping a cool drink, watching the waves and feeling the cold, breeze on her face. And sorry, her name is Rachel Talabart. I even type it out because I think Rachel spelled with an A and an E. So that's her. So she mentions how she felt all this, and she opened her eyes and she's like, doesn't make sense. I'm by the beach looking at the waves.
Yeah.
And feeling the breeze. And her mentor said, then why aren't you by the beach?
Follow it. Yeah.
Photographing the waves.
That's your golden thread.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
So, and that's what she's been doing. She goes early mornings to the seaside and photographs these stunning pieces of work, or just stunning pieces. And I think I'll share that with you sometime. It was basically all these waves shaped in the form of, like, the moment you see it, you know it's Poseidon. And there's these, early muses. So she actually names the series after Greek, characters. So it's amazing what she does with that. But that came to her, that insight came to her in that sense of embodiment, where she could feel where she was and how she felt. It's amazing, how the seed, the clue is right there in the body all the time. Kind of, it's hard for us to kind of get in touch with it and then also work with it and grow with it.
Because it's not just that we're not taught how to do it. We know how to do it. It's our instinct.
Yeah.
But the issue more often is that we're actively taught to not do it.
Yeah.
Right. We're actively taught to disregard our intuition.
Right.
And follow whatever is in the textbook.
Yeah.
Someone had a question. It's not a set list, but sensuality, sexuality, physicality, emotionality, feeling, instinct, intuition. So feeling and intuition, I would add there.
Yeah.
What else?
So yeah, so I think that was, I mean, since you discussed a few of these points and I've been thinking about it, it's been immensely kind of insightful for me because every time I thought about Muse and her instincts, and we've been talking about this, it's natural that when you bring it to fruition and you bring it to work, you of course do it through your body, but to actively and consciously realize that, I think is a huge step in kind of connecting with the Muse in a deeper way. Because now I can actually go back to her and say, what is it that you want me to do? Not from a place of uncertainty and fear and kind of self-doubt, but knowing that I have this body, I've been given this body, and I know that I'm supposed to manifest, these certain things. So I'm waiting for your insight, and now let me get to work and manifest it. So there is a very conscious awareness around that. And that's really helped me a lot, because I think somehow with the self-doubt, it's so much more easier with this framework to know that, yeah, this is just a natural progression, insight and manifestation, kind of drawing inspiration and then through embodiment, bringing it to reality. It's just how the physics works. So it's very reassuring to kind of think over that in that framework. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like the shorthand is, so if you're watching and you're like, okay, so what do I do? What do I do? I think everything you said is valid. And then I think the shorthand for me is, well, in the context of the story, if last week the upshot was slow down the tempo.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The odds are the body is always slower than the mind. The mind can slow down, doesn't like to, but it can. The body cannot speed up. So just knowing that those simple physics, it's just reality. If you want them to be lined up, then just slow down the pace of everything so that we give the body a chance to catch up. So if last week it was like slow down, this week I would say it's leave the duck alone. Leave the duck alone.
Yeah.
And if you can't resist, then spend time learning to be a tailor.
Right.
Right. Spend time in embodiment. Getting back to the body, however you want. It could be yoga. It could be anything. Right. It could be anything. It could be gardening. Right. It could be anything. But then the thing is, one of the other ways I really translate it, especially when we talk about manifestation, is the bellwether in your body, right? Because you could say, well, intellectually, here's the checklist, right? And that may be okay, but again, it's going to be like the priest, where it's like, well, if the checklist is this, we can add the sixth thing to the 5-thing list, and it's like, it often will go off the rails from there. So the simple sort of feeling for me is that in your body, it will feel good. It will feel good. So if it feels good, that's a very good bellwether. Now, I know, like for many of you, myself included, the mind will go off and say, well, drugs feel good, over drinking feels good. So what about that? How do I know it's not soothing? And so one is, when you get to be a good enough tailor, you can tell. You can tell. And then the other is, if you feel like you're not a good enough tailor yet, then just sew more slowly. Like from the last session, slow down the tempo. When you're reaching for soothing, the tempo tends to speed up.
Right.
Where you don't have a chance to like sit with your body and say like, okay, I'm kind of craving that, but it's not coming from a good place. I want to do this other thing. Right. And typically when we soothe in unhealthy ways, the tempo is very fast. We're breathing fast. We're thinking fast. Our eyes are darting, and we're just grabbing the thing to like numb the thing out. Right. So one will help the other. So slowing down will help you feel into like the idea of feeling good, but in like not a good or bad way, but in a way that like will be in line with, the duck nature with good tailoring. Right? If you can't tell, then just sew slower so you don't go off the track.
Right.
You can always slow down. Okay, so I think
exercise.
should we do the exercise?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first exercise is what you said about like just closing your eyes and imagining where you are doing what you want and imagining the scenario which feels really, really good. That's the other thought that came to me.
Yeah.
But she's like, why did I end up on the beach sipping a drink? It makes no sense. But I bet you $20, it felt really good.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of the bellwether. Like it feels good in that way. So that's the first exercise.
Yeah. So we have 2 exercises.
Okay, so I'll do the second exercise, and then I'll close the session.
Right. Okay, then. Thanks, Artie. Let me get this.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you. All right, so the only other exercise here is, given the line of the story, would be to sit quietly at some point this week, just 5-10 minutes, with some journal paper in your car, in the kitchen, what have you, just for a few minutes, and close your eyes and to see if you can think of a time, given the arc of the story, when your intellect, your inner squire, your inner priest went out of control, crossed the line, went too far. Now, some of you may be like, well, that happens every other day. And that's fine. If you said that, you would be like with the most of us, with the majority of us, right, in our modern profane world. But think of either the last time it happened, you did it to yourself, or one of the most, kind of pivotal times. Oh, when I was deciding between this and that path for my career, I chose this for all the squirey, priestly reasons. And I told the cook to do the wrong thing, right? So can you think of a time when your intellect went out of control, and then just write out what the heck even happened? Write it out so that you can see it in front of you, because it's slippery when it's just in your head, right? You write it out. Burn it afterward. Don't write your name on it. Don't show it to anyone, but just write it out so that at least once you have it in print in front of you so that you can look at it as a separate thing, outside of your own inner self. Okay. So can you think of a time when your intellect went out of control? And then given that, how, in the face of that then, did the body attempt to restore balance? Or did it succeed? Is it still trying to attempt to restore balance? It could be that my body revolted, my body shut down, my body came up with this, chronic illness or whatever to slow me down because I was going in the wrong direction. Not an analysis so much as just a reflection, just as a reflection. So can you think of a time when your intellect went out of control? And then in the face of that, in the face of the squire and the priest doing all these wrong things, going too far, how did the body react and attempt to restore control? And was it successful? Right, so scoping out the arc of your own inner fairy tale along these lines, to seeing where you are in the story right now. Right, are you in the middle of the matching wits with the queen? Are you still deciding whether you're going to be apprenticed to a tailor or not? Right, and dive more into embodiment, and trying to sort of orient and navigate through, wayfind yourself to where am I in this story, if you feel that resonance. Okay, so that's the exercise. Again, no pressure to participate, no expectation of participation, only if you want, only if you feel like it, and no fear, threat, or control. Okay. All right, so that's all we had for this session, and so now I'll go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next Sunday. It's free and open to everyone. Please invite others to join. There's a green call to action link in the Crowdcast where you can sign up for the next session. And I think in the Facebook, let me put it there actually. In the chat, I'll just dump out what the link for next week's session is. So if you want to sign up on Crowdcast from Facebook, you can go into the comments where I just put that. And you can sign up for next week's session as well. All right. So with that, I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding the space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.